I've been in a bit of a love triangle with UX and front-end development for a while. As Fiona said, you know, I was working as a front-end developer and I just got really frustrated because all the things that Vitaly was talking about, I was like, oh, I want to do that, but somehow I just didn't have the control in the projects that I was working on to make those kinds of decisions. So then I moved over to UX and I got the chance to, you know, make some of those decisions and try and make an impact, but I just missed the code so much. So now I'm back working in front end, but what I just wish is that UX and front end could get along. But unfortunately, there's no love lost between the two of them. Somehow, UX architects and designers and front end developers, there's just a bit of a break between the two of them. And I seriously think that it is up to us as front end developers to make that leap and bring usability into our projects, right? And not just leave it to the UX people. So that's what we're coming to tonight, is to talk about UX for front end developers. And we're going to flirt with this idea a little bit. And so the best way to do that is to write a bit of a love story. But, you know, it's 2015. This can't just be, you know, your traditional love story, although maybe it is now a traditional love story because it's going to take place on Tinder. So this is our front-end developer card, and, you know, one night when you're swiping through, you come across a sexy lady, or maybe it's a man, depends on who you are, and that's user experience. You swipe right, you know, it's all great, and lucky for you, it's a match. So the way we kick off this story is the way you've got to kick off any Tinder love story, and that's with a really good pickup line. But this is now when we kind of diverge a little bit from our traditional Tinder love story, because you know what kind of comes next at this stage is you're like, yeah, so when are we going to meet up then? But instead we're going to go to that very crucial phase in a normal relationship, which is getting to know UX. You see what I did there? So we all know what user experience is. It's about creating an excellent experience for your users on your website. And we know that it's important because, as Vitaly was saying, if you're not thinking about what they need and their use, they're going to leave. They're not going to convert. They're not going to buy your product. Or even worse, you're going to make this great website which fits all the requirements and you're going to put it out there and then your client's going to turn around and go, but nobody's using it. And they're not going to like you, they're not going to come back, and you're not going to make money. So to have really good UX and to put that on your site is crucial. And there's kind of 3 phases to UX. I'm sure some of you will know this, but I'm just going to kind of talk you through it and give you a few examples of how it applies to you as well as front-end developers. So the first stage is research. Now, research is so crucial in UX because it means you're actually going out and speaking to your users and finding out what they want, what they need, what they're doing, how they're currently using your product, or if your product hasn't come out yet, then how they're using competitor products, all that kind of stuff. And the sad thing is that as a front-end developer, I have never seen any of that research. It just never filters through to me. And I think that it's so vital because, think about it, in the later stages of a project, that's when you start getting all the change requests come in, for instance. And if you are trying to make decisions and you don't know all that information about your users, how can you accurately make those decisions for your website and say, yes, we're going to go and make that change request when you don't know what it is that your users want? You just can't create the best user experience. So there's a number of different types of research that we can do. So interviews and surveys are probably the most commonly known and understood versions of that. So it's about qualitative and quantitative data, which creates a really good base for you to understand exactly what it is that your users want and need. More than that, we also go and run workshops. So usually that's with stakeholders to understand business needs. And then the really crucial one, I think, is observation. So I've used Opal here as an example of where you might go and see something that's being used in a situation and see how people use their business card, their Opal card, And you'll probably very quickly realize, as in my situation, that I always forget to tap off when I leave the bus. I'm sure a lot of people have also done that. So perhaps there's a better way of designing that system. Observation is really key here. Another example in that was I was reading about somebody who was creating an app to be used in a warehouse. And by going into that warehouse and really looking and seeing how people were operating day to day, they discovered that everybody was always carrying something in one hand. So that meant that they had to create an app where everything was accessible just using one hand. That also raises the question of like, well, left-handed, right-handed, is that an option that people need to be able to set in their app? Another example which uses exactly the same case is porn websites. Has to be accessible only by one hand. The output of all that research is things which I hope you've seen, but maybe you haven't. And again, this is all things that I never saw as a front-end developer. So first of all, it's about personas. So these are people who you could imagine are actually sitting at the table with you. You will likely have a primary persona and then a few secondary personas. That means that any question that arises, you can say, hey Susan, is this important to you, Susan? If it's not important to you, Susan, then is it important to us? No. It's not something that we should be worrying about. And all the lights are turning off. Beyond that, then there are user journeys, which is about the actual flow that people are taking through your website. So this really determines all the content that goes on your page, where buttons are linking, what people want to see, and how they're going to get from one thing to another. And that's so important because your website is literally all about information, whether that's information about a product, information about whatever topic that you're trying to sell. If your users can't find what they're looking for, then that's not helpful. User journeys also highlight the key tasks that a website is meant to do. So for instance, if you've created 6 user journeys and those are 6 key tasks that your website does, if your website does not do one of those 6 tasks, it has essentially failed in its usability. The last thing is then information architecture, which is the site structure. And to clarify this, information architecture and the navigation are 2 separate things. Your nav does not have to be the same as your information architecture. So in the IA, you may have all your products listed in one section, but in the nav, you can then tailor that towards your users. So for instance, you might have women's shoes and men's shoes, but as products, they all sit within the same IA section. With all that information, then we come to the next stage, which is prototyping. So there's a few different ways that you can prototype. Paper prototypes, for instance, or also wireframes. So to do a little shameless plug here are some wireframes from Bubble. And I think wireframes are super helpful for front-end developers because designs, you often get caught up in all the colors and where the pixels is. I've, in the past couple of weeks, been yelled at because something was 16 pixels instead of 15 pixels. Like, I'm not even joking, and it happens with such frequency, and it really annoys me. But the wireframes give you much more of an idea of exactly what it is meant to be on your page. And now imagine going into Chrome and turning off your CSS. If you can't see your markup looking something like what the wireframe looks like, then that's a pretty good indication that your markup's got to change. From there, you can then use those wireframes to test, or you can also test your final thing or your paper prototype. So here's just a few different examples of what you might test. So at the top, we've got a prototype. Then down the bottom, we have 2 different versions of a paper prototype. So you can see it can be really primitive. The bottom ones is literally just stickers and a couple of hand-drawn lines, or a much more sophisticated design. But the interesting thing about the bottom ones is that because it's on a phone and you can hold it in your hand, even if you don't have that as a final product, you can see how people will be using it. And it lets them also take it into context. So again, coming back to that idea of observation, how people are actually going to use it. Another cool tool is the one up the top, which is called Look Back, which you can build into your native apps, and it lets you see the person's face, you can record their voice, it also records everywhere they're touching, and gives you a nice little timeline of all the things just automatically. Very cool. There's one other part of testing in UX which doesn't actually involve users. And this is the bit where I get really excited. And when someone in a relationship starts to get really excited, it only leads to one thing. And that is Fexy time. Just kind of my squish at front end and UX and get Fexy. Yeah. So there's a bit of funny CSS for you as well. Yeah. Anyways. So there's a test which is used in UX called a heuristic evaluation. And this is not run with users, but is instead run by UX professionals. And it's going out there and looking at a website and finding all the problems that's wrong with it. So I've put up here the heuristics. We'll kind of loop through to the second lot. There's 10 of them. And the heuristics are really interesting because if you have a read through those, you'll notice that a lot of them are applicable not just to usability, but also to code, and also if you work in a CMS, to the authoring experience which you're providing people. So to have a bit of a look through some of them, match between the system and real world, which was on the first set. So that's about things like labels, make sure that the labels that you're presenting people, they can understand and they know what that is and what that's doing. When you look at code then, that's about variable names, Will people understand what your variable is actually doing? Consistency in standards, so your pages should use the same design elements. If you're going to have a menu in the top corner, then always make your menu in the top corner. Don't suddenly change it on another page. You'd be surprised, it happens. And then again, that comes through to your code, so it's about using, I don't know if it's going to be brackets on a new line. You're always going to do your brackets on a new line, or tabs versus spaces. We want to get into that discussion. Other ones, flexibility and efficiency of use, so that's about load time, just making sure that your website loads quickly, so that's great for your users. And then help and documentation, comments, put comments in your code. And so you can see by looking at these heuristics, it's basically just a list of all the things that make a website great. And as front-end developers, we can use that list too to do our own usability checks of the websites that we're building. And it allows us to have a look through before we give it to a client and go, hey, wait, this is actually a problem. And if you can find just 2 or 3 usability issues, even if it's out of 20 or 25, you're already presenting a better user experience to your customers. And as we said before, that's going to lead them to come back, to spend money with you, and for people to be happy. So we then come to falling in love and living happily ever after. So how can we fall in love with UX and live happily ever after together? Well, first of all, spend more time together. If you have UX people in your company, go and talk to them. Get them involved even in the later stages of the project where maybe normally they would have moved on to something else. Ask them their opinion, ask them what they think about what is happening. Then spend more time with UX. Go learn about it, do your own research, and really find out more. Look into heuristics, look into all the other types of processes that UX professionals do, and just understand more about it. Compliment them. If you think more positively about UX, then other people will too, especially if you then also introduce them to your friends. So go out and talk to people about the need for usability, just as I am doing now. And then lastly, just make them part of your life. So if you bring UX and usability into your projects and into your sites, it can only lead to one thing, and that is love.